Okay, so streaming is live, and now let's see if it's going to activate. There it is. And we are live, okay. Hello, you guys. So we're on week 2 of the environment sketching course. In the first week, we covered general organic sketching, and we'll have some stuff to critique from some of my own community members after this lesson, but we're going to jump into what we want to cover this week, which is uses of perspective for composition and going into basic composition of elements using primitives. When we talk about uses of perspective for composition, we know that there is 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. All of these are represented by vanishing points, which hopefully we all know in perspective lessons. If we don't know, then I would suggest that people visit that. I do have a video on my YouTube channel that covers that. But in general, 1-point perspective has 1 vanishing point. 2-point will have 2, maybe another one far off, and 3-point is going to have 3. So if you were to follow these lines, they'll give different effects. With these vanishing points, you get different, I guess, ways of conveying visual language. And that's what we're going to cover before getting into the actual implementation of this, is what can we use different forms of perspective for. When we have 3-point perspective, well, let's start with 1. 1-point perspective, you're basically looking at a face of, if you were to imagine a box, the face head-on. You have a box here, a vertical line. There are no vanishing points going in this direction, so it's going to be infinitely parallel. You can then close it off, so you have a straight box this way. If you're to follow the vanishing points back and close it off again, you have the indications of a box. You can close it off, and there you go, 1-point perspective. 2-point has you looking at, and we'll call that face. 2-point has you looking at edges. So if you form this line and follow vanishing points this direction, as well as the opposite, you'll be looking at the edge of this box. You can then close it off, and you have a box with a different point of view. 3-point has you looking at corners. So here you can start with a line, and you want it to follow down to this vanishing point, same with these. You'll end up with a box that looks something like this. Three different uses, all to display the same sort of shape. Now let's shrink this down. Oops. I'm going to go through a bunch of images that I've pulled up, and we'll break down some of the perspective here. We're going to cover the uses of one point first. I've got people in my Discord asking questions, and right now we've got P asking 3 points usually means looking from vertical angles, right? So we'll cover that soon. It can, and also it doesn't have to. It's going to add an element of verticality, yes, because it's the most naturalistic form of perspective. If you have a canvas and you set it up this way, you can have your horizon line off of the canvas, which would imply that your third vanishing point is probably going to have moved up to the point where it is now in the canvas itself. And so therefore anything that you're looking at is going to be looking down at that point. So you'll have faces that are pointed downwards. So that would be like a cityscape. But you can also set it up in a way that it's just adding an element of naturalness. So if you have a low horizon line, but it's not yet off the canvas, you could do 2-point perspective, meaning the vertical lines aren't going to be changing, and that will work. But if you want it to feel more like it's what you would be seeing in person, it's more natural, or if you want to fit more in scale, then you would introduce a third vanishing point that adds that extra element. So yes, you're correct that it adds vertical angles, but in terms of it, you looking straight up or down is where I would like to clarify. Okay, let's add that back in here. All right. We're going to cover different uses of perspective. I've got these Pinterest boards. I'm going to redraw them. I don't have them on my iPad itself, so I'll just do quick, simple breakdowns of them to the left. When we're talking about 1 point, compositionally, you can use this for we'll talk about head-on angles, so looking straight forward. You can use this for graphic reads. You can also use this to look straight up or down. There may be more, but I'm also, just remembering this off the top of my head. So this image to the right here, its basic setup from a thumbnail is to create a sense of isolation and to focus our eye. So having a single point on the canvas, and if we look at this, the general setup is horizon line here, vanishing point on the left side, so that when we come down this way, we have this big effect. And then we have a figure and he's accented by some more detail. The reason that you might pick to do 1 point perspective for this is because it has leading lines that are going to really accentuate where you want somebody to look. Because he had that single perspective right here, everything compositionally is feeling like it's leading towards our focal point, the man. It just so happens that one-point perspective also comes up a lot because it's a general approximation of you looking down at something. Things will turn to two-point if you orient yourself around so that you're seeing the edge or a corner. But in general, if you were just thinking about, like, what are you seeing? You are seeing a single point. So we'll talk about that later, but 1, 2, and 3 point are not overbearing rules that define everything in a scene, and we'll see more of that. Okay, here's another image, Coffee Shop by Jun Chu. And this one is a graphic setup. So here we have a table line, and we've got characters set against the table. There is just a bare top side showing that single point of perspective, but the main focus here is on a graphic read. It's possible that the person even started with this thumbnail sketch and then decided that the best way to position everything was just to frame them in a graphic way that didn't require a need for perspective. So with this one, there is no main use of perspective other than to define solidity to the object. Same with this image here. If we just sketch it out very quickly, we've got this doorway that implies one point, and then the main focus is in the center of the frame where the leading lines would go on this man. So one-point perspective is actually used very frequently in animation, especially. The reason so is because animation is all about having a quick read in order to get across a point or a mood, and you can establish that very easily using one-point perspective. If we see this painting by Zach Retz for Spider-Verse, there we can add that note as well. One-point perspective is going to create symmetry. So we've got a door, and we have very clear leading lines. That would all lead to a single point with a bunch of stuff on the sides, and we got Miles sitting here. Okay. Next we'll cover two-point perspective. Two-point is good for stability and calm scenes, because there's nothing dramatic going about it. It's descriptive, so you can see more. And it can be asymmetrical. When you want to introduce an element of natural viewing, but you're getting too much distortion or one point is too strong, you can introduce a second point. So in order to do that mechanically, you would move this dot over to the left, and let's redraw that. So now this dot might be over here. And the lines that were previously going infinitely in this direction, because there was no other vanishing points, have now been introduced, and the point is now on the horizon line, let's say. So any lines in canvas are going to be leading here. And now you've introduced a 2-point. With this, we can approximate this image that we have pulled up by Leia Pinto. She was one of the art directors for Spider-Verse, really helped with establishing the look. She's excellent. And by allowing the viewer to see the second side, we can get a good sense of the shape of this building. It's not that interesting looking on, it's mainly just a box, right? So how do you add more interest? You can do that by introducing a second vanishing point. You can see stuff that's on the edge here. You can have leading lines that are coming in from different directions, and you can set up generally more complex scenes than just a graphic read with 1-point perspective. Two-point is going to be especially good for interior spaces. Any of these can work for any type of scene. It's just depending on what you need to go for. But here I'm looking at the second 343 image, and I'm seeing a horizon line that is a little less than halfway, because I'm looking at this light shape as well as the corner of this pillar. And seeing how it has leading lines that are all leading this direction, probably to a vanishing point somewhere over there, and a vanishing point over here. And we have a repetition of its columns. And that's the general feel. It's descriptive, it's nothing too crazy, it's good for when you're trying to demonstrate information about a scene. This one is interesting just for the fact that it is 2-point perspective, but it has a 1-point perspective kind of setup, I would like to say, where it does feel like your eye is being led in one direction, and that's because of how it's staged. It's staged in a way where all of the lines are leading to a single point. They want you to look over here, like this car. But the reason that it is still 2-point is that you can see the natural convergence to lines that would probably end up somewhere over here, or way, 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 way off the vanishing point. Whereas the second vanishing point, VP2, is much closer to being on canvas. And you can do that often. You can have your first vanishing point still on canvas, with the second one just introducing that element of naturalness to the lens. It helps you reduce distortion. Okay, let's look for one more image that I can use for 3-point. Hi to people in the YouTube chat. Sorry that I took so long to see you. P in the Discord is asking what for extra clarification between 1-point and 2-point perspective. Oh, let me fix this cable. Okay, better. The difference between 1-point and 2-point perspective is, for one thing, the additional point. But let's go back to the other. 1-point allows for you to have head-on angles, graphic reads, and symmetry. This box here is similar in setup to this here. Dang it. Okay. The only reason that one is 1-point and this one is not is because you have natural convergence going in the second direction, and there were other objects that were in this scene that converged as well. So it was reducing distortion for what could have been a 1-point shot, but it was adding an element of believability by replicating the look of a real camera lens more than this would. Okay, so convergence, that is a topic covered in perspective lessons, and we won't necessarily cover that here. You can go to my YouTube channel, and I have some videos that explain perspective. There are also many more online. So, quick thing is that the term convergence refers to lines. If lines go infinitely and are parallel, they will never touch each other. If you introduce an element of convergence, which means going to a point, they all line up at a point, they are converging. So convergence is seeing that tilt, that angle, going to a vanishing point. Yes, 2-point perspective has convergence. 1-point does have convergence, only with a single point, not 2. Okay, 3-point perspective. I'll just go to his art station, because I'm not getting what I want. Okay, this is a really good, subtle explanation of 3-point perspective. I've already explained how 3-point works. That is where you introduce a third point so that there is an element of verticality. You can either be looking down or you can just be providing a sense of looking up somewhere. You're going to have vanishing points that all lead somewhere, resulting in buildings that could look like this. Now, 3-point is good for drama, verticality, the most natural lens, Hello in YouTube chat. Thanks for joining. So this image to the right by Luca Pisanu here. Let's see, vertical aspect ratio. This one's really subtle. We've got this main leading line of the buildings, but the vertical is not fully straight. It's tilted. And the only reason that could be is because it is following a third vanishing point. It's a low horizon line, since we see this vanishing point going all the way over here. If we were to follow that and imagine it, it's going to come down and it's going to make it small. This will keep going, whereas this less extreme angle will go until it converges at this point. If we follow that over here, low horizon line. Now you can see we've got a building in the background that is going this direction, and some other shapes that all add to this 3-point read. The way you can tell is, for one, we've got this building, and if we follow that line, it's going to vanishing point number 3. And then some general shapes that show form. So if you introduce those leading lines, you can have little signs that feel like they're adding that third edge, but they're all going up. So that's a really subtle way. It allows you to fit larger scenes into more compressed spaces because things are converging all in one direction. And then let's look at some of the more overt examples. In this scene, we are looking down. We have a person. And they are standing in this foreground. Now we can see these leading lines of the vertical pillars leading to a vanishing point that is probably around here. And the rest are all converging up more like this. So if we imagine a horizon line way up here, there's one that's over here and one that's over here loosely. So let's just show some more depth to this. More form. The elements of a room looking down. It can be the trickiest to draw as a beginner, especially shots that are looking down. You just have so much to account for that it can definitely be annoying, to say the least. Here's another example. This one is a 3-point perspective, but in a landscape, so the only leading lines are the building itself. You've got one here, and then you've got this building. One of the easiest ways to tell, along with the leading lines, is that you can't see the horizon anywhere. There's no horizon, you just have rocks continuing to follow mostly what you would think of the ocean or as land. And with that, you've got a vanishing point that is going this way, VP3. You got one going this way. And of course, there's one following this direction. So the horizon line is off the page. General rule of thumb for implementing 3-point is move that horizon line low or high. Either one is going to force the introduction of a third vanishing point in order to look natural. Hey, iPatch on YouTube. Thanks for the compliment. I hope this is helpful. We're going to be covering more in the future and in this video. Last 3-point is good for, we'll call it Shoebox. Design callouts. So if that, we're looking at this image on the right, and you can implement a quick shoebox by setting up basically a box. You can cut into it however you'd like, and then anything that you do, you would just follow these vanishing points in order to design a room. As a result, you would probably call it the most descriptive thing, so it's like loose perspective. And then I also wanted to cover things that would probably come up with questions, and that is natural perspective. At least that's what I'm calling it. Natural perspective is where there is no clear vanishing point. Mostly having nature. And that would be anything with landscapes or organic shapes. For instance, this splash art from Legends of Runeterra is mostly focused on the character. As a result, you know, like if you were thinking compositionally and you were trying to come up with something, maybe you started with the pose of this guy, and he's got his arm, he's holding a thing, he's got his legs, and these little sheep creatures. So when you wanted to add something in, you could say, well, I want to add in this background. I could have a building behind him, or I could make this 3-point, but it's all really dramatic, you know? And setting him in this countryside allows for this naturalistic perspective that has no clear definition, but allows for establishing graphic reads or just setting up stuff that complements him from a compositional standpoint. So the best way to break it down would just be to have vanishing point, not vanishing points, but perspective lines that approximate how perspective works without using a vanishing point. So for instance, we know that perspective gets more compressed as it goes into the distance, and the closer it gets to us, it exponentially increases. You can generally imagine putting a vanishing point on, but it's not going to actually account for the perspective that you use. It's just there to provide the feeling of space. So you can do that, and if you wanted to, you could have some verticality Or it can just all stay straight, and you can be looking at a countryside with a nice mountain and other graphic shapes. But just like that, you have your naturalistic perspective that implies distance without you conforming to a vanishing point. Because really, vanishing points are just the mechanical explanation for why primitives are shaped the way that they are, why they're oriented the way they are. But all perspective exists in this naturalistic use where things aren't just adhering to a vanishing point. In that way, to go off of that, you can have a scene that could be in 1 point or 2 point. Let's go 2 point. And you might have a building that adheres to that 2 point perspective. But you can also have buildings that aren't. So maybe there's one that is rotated slightly differently. That's a bad example. Let's go with 1 point. We have this box. And a lot of the scene is in 1 point perspective, we might say. But then you can have some boxes that are rotated. It doesn't matter. As long as they adhere to the horizon line, it will work. You can do that. So, in general, perspective exists as its own fluid thing. If you have a 1 point, 2 point, 3 point setup, it is only to help define the objects that are in the space and to allow for uniformity for things like cities and man-made objects. And the same goes for this other Legends of Runeterra shot here. We've got a person really focusing on a graphic read of their pose, and then everything else is just to accentuate what is there. No real perspective except for naturalistic perspective. Okay. All right. So what we want to cover next is, let's see. Using our understanding of primitives in order to compose shots. Now, we're not going to go into anything as complex as creating a big epic scene from scratch or having anything in mind either. We are going to mainly start with having scenes, defining perspective, and then drawing primitives within them. Okay. So for this first one, if I have a perspective that is set up around here, and maybe we've got a vanishing point, I'll set these farther apart. Around here, we want it to be 2 point perspective. One that is really far off the horizon line, and a second one that is still on the page. we can start drawing a scene by approximating how this will work. If you can no longer see the leading lines, just let me know. And now we can draw. So let's say I want a building. Maybe we've got this vanishing point right here. That's a good spot for our eye to be led to. So like the garage shot from earlier with the car, we can draw a box. And maybe we'll follow this out. And now this kind of looks like an alleyway to me, or some sort of, I don't know, this almost looks like a mirror or like a portal into another place. Let's go with this. The general idea being you can use your understanding of vanishing points to draw scenes without any idea of what they are. Let's go with a 3-point. This one's way off here. This one's over here. And then we've got a vanishing point that is going to be more slight. Way too far off canvas for us to use. Maybe it's like a Mayan head. Aha. And we've got some buildings. And this is a big temple. We'll do 2 more examples. This one will be in 1 point. And let's go over an interesting concept. I don't think that I had shown it. 1 point can act as if it's looking straight up or down. So maybe we've got a person and they are like this: body, legs, feet. And then we've got this table, they've got a chair, they've got this rug, and this can be a door. It's not mechanically sound, but I'm just trying to demonstrate uses for it. Lastly, let's go with one more. We'll do 2 point again. And we'll go with a high angle. So benefits to this. I could see something like a street. Draw it on the right layer. Then this street would probably be obfuscated by buildings. Keep in mind that I'm only trying to draw with primitive box shapes. Okay, we got something that resembles a scene, just for boxes. And this is going to be the basis of which our homework stands on. So let's label this primitives in perspective. For anybody who is in voice chat with me on Discord, feel free to speak up now. You're totally welcome to talk. Ask anything that you want, because I'm going to start defining homework and going over a critique from last week. Homework. So homework that I would like for anyone who wants to, or those who are watching this now, we covered intro to perspective, and I will be demoing a little bit more about primitive based compositions. So let's go with breakdowns of different scenes. Break down 1 point, 2, 3, and I want, let's see, 3 breakdowns each. $12 total. Now a breakdown is where you have an image, and let's say that it's that tower image from before with the castle. What I want people to do is to go and add in where the horizon line is, show their main leading lines of convergence that allowed for them to decide how the perspective was set up, and break it down for themselves. You can also, if you wanted to, I can't, but you could pull that grid out and have it on the side just to show a general setup of how it worked. So do 3 of those for each perspective. That way you know what you're looking for and you know how they operate. Bonus points to you if you find different uses and make note of how each perspective is conveying a point. For the rest of the homework, ten compositions per 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. We don't need to do the natural. This equals 30 sketches. You don't have to go crazy. We're still in the basic stages right now. So Matthias, I'm sorry. You have been watching. Do you have anything that you'd like to talk about or you found interesting, or before I start moving on?
I right now I dig a lot the 3-point perspective because of the drama that it could like represent in a picture. I would like to try a lot of that 3-point perspective.
Yeah, you'd like to see more of it. You want me to demo more of it, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want.
Sure. So I'm going to set up a perspective grid. And we'll do several with like a genuine, actually accurate grid. So this is 3-point perspective. And we're just going to go with primitives. I set the horizon low because I guess that doesn't matter. When you have a horizon line either low or high, for one you have compositional asymmetry, which means you have a lot of space taking up 90% here and 10% here, which is a foundation of compositional interest. For our purposes, it's down here. But also, the further away you move from the middle, the further away you're moving from looking at something straight on. So if you introduce a 3rd point, then all of a sudden everything here has to follow that. And depending on how extreme it is, it can cause a lot of distortion. But in general, that's why 3-point perspectives either have a horizon line off the canvas or very far to any kind of edge of the canvas. So, let's go with this shape. No, let's go tall. I want to go tall. So what I'm doing here is drawing out this main building. It's in 3-point perspective, so we've got lines going up towards a vertical convergence, vertical vanishing point. We have lines going this direction, but they're behind, so we can't see them except for this top one and here. And then we have a third vanishing point going this way. Excuse me. If we want to introduce more layers of depth, I can have this break and then show more buildings like that, as well as some in the background. We'll just keep layering them on. How about that? These can be pillars. Maybe we'll establish some visual language. So that would be me following like a creative setup for 3-point. We'll try this again with a different point of view. Feel free to follow along with me or let me know if I'm going too fast, you guys. In this one, I'm going to have the horizon line, which is the line that goes straight across. I'm going to introduce that high off of the ground. So you can already see this simulating what we would be looking at. It already looks like we're looking at a ground plane. By introducing the third point, we define how strong that verticality goes. So now I can have a main block here. And let's just explore what happens when we draw squares and I don't know about you guys, maybe I've just been at this for a while now, but I can already see it coming together, can you? So now you have a cityscape. Another reason that we set up horizon lines low is when you introduce high horizon lines. So let's get rid of these and have it up here. If you set up something like this, in general that would be like, what am I thinking of? It could be, well, we did a street shot before, but maybe it's like a canyon and you have to draw all this stuff, and And there's a bunch of trees. You got this river that's running down it. It's more difficult because you have more of it you have to account for. You have to describe things. You have to draw it all out. If you had general buildings, like maybe this is the top of a house, and you're drawing out this pool. I don't know. This is a fence. And you got more houses over here. Maybe this is their garage. And you can't forget about the roof. When you have all this information to account for, it makes things more difficult because you have to draw it all. And things have to be correct in perspective so that they feel like they're proportionally similar, like they are correct. And you can do this. It's easy enough to do. People do it all the time. But I can share, at least from the point of view of animation, the more common approach. And now you're not going to not do that kind of shot if the scene calls for it. Like, do what you need to do. But in general, another reason that we pick low horizon lines so often is because the perspective is so similar all of the time that you can get away with the proportional relationships in terms of distance. So let's say we've got a hill and there's a house. When you draw other things here, they can be really big, maybe they're still kind of small, but their placement in regards to other things can get fudged around a lot. You compress the amount of usable distance, so that way things kind of return to being a graphic read again. You can have trees. So see how much that was flattened out by reducing the horizon line so low? In comparison, this one is all space. This is all stuff that you have to draw, detail, add benches, have it be correct in perspective, add a grill, like all of that has to be in there, and you have to make it look right. So that's another compositional tidbit that you might pick up on if you're trying to showcase a building or a design. Oftentimes you're going to pick something like that. One, because it puts priority on it. And two, you don't have to worry about the perspective of everything else. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do one more. Again, if anybody has questions, feel free to talk. I'll keep covering 3-point since I know that's usually more difficult or more confusing. Let's talk about shoeboxes. A shoebox would best be approached by having a general shape of your room. So here's a room, here's another space, and maybe this is like an entryway. You can then follow your vanishing point, your third vanishing point, to extrude upwards. If you double up on your lines, you can add thickness. And then everything that you would draw in here gets to adhere to your vanishing points. So maybe there's a bed here. Maybe this is the living space, so he's got a TV that lives here. This chair does not have to adhere to the same grid. And I'll pull it up. We got chairs, we want a table, and we got shelves. Here I'm moving things off of the vanishing point because I want them to have a tilt. So all I'm doing there is if I'm just cutting corners, so if I were to follow this down, but I wanted the ending point to be out here, I would take that origination point on the wall and bringing it down to the final point that I want, which creates a tilt. I've just done it enough times that I don't need to plot that out anymore. But it also just so happens that the furniture is built this way. Okay. This is like a CD holder. Tons of CDs on it. Because we are in the early 2000s again. No room is complete without a window. It'd be pretty depressing. Need curtains. And we're going to cover set design in much more detail in a few weeks. Right now I'm just using this as an opportunity to showcase how we can draw in 3-point. Maybe we want an interesting rug that follows, that goes against the grain and adds some interest. We'll add our what's this called? This is like crown molding, but it's not crown molding, it's just floor molding. Maybe there's some like paintings. stuff hanging. There you go, you got a room. Okay. Alexander's talking about a cool tidbit. Yeah. Which tidbit in particular? Sorry. I was too busy drawing. Oh, the horizon line being low. Gotcha. That was a... Man, I really zoned in. Sorry. Yes. The horizon line being low means that you don't have to describe as much detail. And when you bring the horizon line up, you're generally going to be seeing more of the floor, which means you have to describe all of the space in between it. Which is why shoebox designs like this are really good for showing detail and showing a space, because you get to see all of that space. If you want to minimize that, look from the opposite direction, look from the bottom up, so that it compresses space back to retain graphic elements. And you'll see that used all of the time in animation shots. Everything that is not used to show how space feels, but instead establish a singular design, is going to have a low horizon line. Okay. Guys, I think that's everything for my demo. I would love it if anybody had any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go into critiquing Bird's input from last week. Let me open up all these links. Yep, we got a question. Just wait for it to be written. Still opening stuff. Okay, so we got a question from Feltrucci. When working professionally, what do you think is the minimum acceptable resolution to go for? So so it's just a different question. You're talking about resolution of your canvas. I think that is going to be defined by the team that you're working with. Like on my gig, I have been given a resolution to work on. In general, you don't want to work on a canvas that isn't going to hold up. Like, imagine if you got good enough that you could sell prints. You want to be able to sell a high resolution print, or use it on a high definition display. If you've got the memory for it, no reason not to make a 4K canvas. I've never made just a 1080p, so everything I do is at least probably like 4K resolution. So cool. Glad that helped answer it. Got another question coming in from Matthias. in my work experience, is there a certain perspective that is used more above the others? Well, I'm currently working in animation as a background guy, and I didn't design any of the shots, the storyboard artist did, but I had noticed that a lot of the shots that the storyboard artist was going for resulted in one-point perspective setups. Stuff that allowed for graphic scenes where one person is talking and the other person is talking and they are emoting in some sort of way that allows for them to act, and everything else is here in the background that it doesn't really have perspective defined because they didn't plan it. If they didn't plan it at all, it's more on me to define a shot, and I've got a character that's he kind of is in this more dramatic power pose or something, then I would take that opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe there's like a perspective that goes this way, and I can set things up. And I'm going off of a scene design that I have, but in general, I'm trying to add more variety than what I saw in the storyboard itself. So it's a play-by-play, play-by-ear kind of thing. And when you would pick different perspectives, different compositional layouts, it's for allowing you to convey a different point. It's really about what are you trying to communicate, and how are you going to get there? What setup allows for you to do that? And feel free to talk, Matthias, if you'd like. It's no problem. Okay. We've got submissions from last week from one of my community members. He goes by Bird. So we were going over basic environment sketching, and I'm just going to be critiquing some of what he's got. It'll be a lot easier for me to critique if I have it on my iPad itself, so bear with me while I grab those. Cool. Very cool. Which way am I trying to scroll? I'm scrolling wrong direction. Okay. All right. We are now fully in casual territory for you guys in voice, so if you want to talk with me, it is no problem at all. Feel free to turn on your mics. We can chat away. We can talk about whatever. So, assignments were to draw organics, and then simplify them, then break down perspective, and try man-made as well. I'm going to go over some general stuff that I see. And so what I'm seeing that I think is a good thing is we've got good grouping on these tree shapes. I like how you've condensed things down so that they're easily digestible, circular shapes. You can very, very clearly see that there was an overall idea. I like that with the rocks here that they've been compressed. I'm assuming this is a rock. One thing that I'm struggling to see with this one is the third side. I don't know if there was one in the reference, but it's not really coming across, especially here. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. The biggest thing that I am going to touch on is, let's see, big, medium, and small. Yeah. So big, medium, and small is a general design principle that doesn't just come into play with concept design, but any sort of visual design in general. If I were to go off of that real quick and we just set up graphic shapes. We've got a big one. We've got a medium one. And we've got small shapes. Maybe there's a bit of overlap. And then if you really, really want to push it, a big shape like that. So what is the value in this? You get a sense of scale, you get a sense of natural variety, and nothing feels like it was planned out or handmade. For whatever reason, people, humans, I've heard it explained that we like uniformity. And so even if we're consciously trying to change things up, we have a tendency for things to get evenly spaced or to be even in size subconsciously. So a good thing to do when you're going back through stuff is to purposefully revise the things that you've done. So if you were designing, so we've still got his plant work here. I'm looking at this one right now, or let's go with this guy. We've got this tree, and it has 3 medium shapes, 3 medium branches, and 1 trunk that is kind of a combination of the two. How would we edit this so that it expresses more interest? Now, I know that he was most likely looking at a photo reference here, and especially if you're not used to designing from a photo and taking artistic reference, then you're going to have some issues. But once we look at this from a breakdown, we can start to design and push it further. And hey, Cody, one of my best buds is in the YouTube chat. Thanks for hopping in. Maybe can learn a little bit about art. So I'm going to go with this as a large shape here and push that overall. So maybe I want this massive idea with a middling branch here. We need some big old thick trunks, excuse me. And we'll kind of keep a similar height proportion, so it's going to be stocky. And then this one can thin out.
So what is your thought process when? Sorry, is my audio good?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Okay, cool. So what is your thought process when doing that fake trunk?
This thick trunk, so I'm implementing a principle that character designers use a lot and animation designers use a lot, and that is when you maintain size but you make something larger, then you need to account for that by maintaining the same size but changing the proportion of something. So if you have a person and they're evenly proportioned to have legs and to have arms, but you want them to have a really big, stocky chest, well, you might expand that out, but you don't want to make him taller that's just going to ruin the proportion and make him more similar when he's brought out and when he's zoomed out. If you zoom him out, he's still going to have legs. So he might keep his pelvis, and then he's going to have these really stocky legs to support his weight and little tiny feet. And then his arms might still be this size and his head stays the same. But now he looks bigger, right? And you can continue to push that. So maybe you have this massive shape with this guy. And he still has the same legs, right? His legs are even small. So it's playing into design interest.
Right, it's kind of like compensating one with the other.
Yes, it's a I've heard it referred to as proportional weight. So right now the weight of him is even. He's got 25%, 25%, whereas this guy, this is 50%. And the other 25 is still here.
It's like 12.5.
Yeah. So when I am changing up this tree over here, I'm thinking about, one, we need a tree trunk that is going to support all of those branches.
Right.
And two, I am keeping it in the same basic proportion, the same space, while changing how it's implemented. So I'm going to go into this grouping, and I'm going to have a big group. Then I'll have a smaller one, a more medium-sized group right here, and it will overlap. And then I'll break up these branches so that there's a medium one, a thin one, and then this one's going to have a thin, medium. I have no idea if that's how tree branches are normally set up. I'm just designing from a graphic standpoint. So hopefully this conveys the idea of how big, medium, and small. You can then do micro shapes where you've got small little shapes coming out here, small ones.
Yeah, what is your favorite way of simplifying something as complex as trees? But still like giving it the sense that it has foliage and it's not just like two circles on top of a tree skeleton to call it that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I find it difficult. I'm going to find some notes that I have from another class, and we'll go over that more further down the line, but it can be really difficult. Let's see. For one, you want to focus on silhouette detail as much as possible. Shapes and groups. And okay, we got it open here. It's probably difficult to see. We'll go with that. These are some notes that a friend took from another class. And basically what he is describing here is that he starts with a grouped shape, like a tree, and then he draws in shapes within it. So he's got his trunk, and everything that this guy does is silhouette first. We focus on silhouette, so that's what allows us to read something at a glance and know what it is. It's not the detail that describes that. it's something like this being a rock and this being a bush. It can still be that simple, but once you break it up with general ideas of information, all of a sudden you get the idea of implied texture. So how far you push, so once you start with your graphic shape, how far you push that texture is how far you're willing to detail. And with good general visual design, you want to make sure that your detail has areas of rest and areas of busyness, and you can describe that in places of shadow, or you could describe it in places of light. You could say, I want all of the trees to have detail, and then I want the tree trunks to be totally bare. No detail. Just something that allows it to not feel like it's just marks everywhere, because that does no good from a visual appeal point of view.
So it's like that thing you mentioned with my last piece, value grouping. And I when I was investigating that, I heard about bracketing values, or like making darks more compressed, value compression, right? In a way that the shadows are like no detail, whereas all the details are in the light, or vice versa.
Yes.
All the details on the shadow side and the light is like blown up.
Exactly. You're exactly right. It's a similar principle to value grouping, because the general principle at play is that we are designing where we want people to look.
Awesome.
And we always want to start from a place of simplicity. In your case, you're talking about value grouping, which would be, so I've got a person and I want to frame them in an area of light and shadow. So if this were a frame, then that would be the general statement of my composition. All of my values need to adhere to this. Maybe I would add some variation here, so these would be trees, then I bring them up. That detail can still be there, but they're going to be contained within this value group, so that all of this reads as dark, as that dark value, so that when you first look at this image from far away, you can tell that what we want to look at is a person. We're taking that principle and applying it to line by starting with the silhouette first. By designing the silhouette, we've got a bunch of trees, and you can see that in the notes here. So he starts with designing these tree shapes, and only after he has those tree shapes does he add general detail to explain to us that yes, these are trees. He even talks about how, and we'll cover this later, of how from different levels of, depending on how close you are to the camera, you can get away with more or less detail. And I'm going to pull up an Instagram thread from Jordan Tuffin. Don't have the search feature apparently. I think I might have saved it. Yeah. Let's go to this, please. My God. Instagram on the computer. It's just a mess.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go over what he's talking about here. He's talking about line working a large scene. It seems really intimidating to approach line working a piece this complex and large of a scale. One of the main issues that people spend time on is too much time detailing things. One of the ways you can save time is to rely on our mind's ability to fill in the blanks from suggested detail. So, we take a look at this. The reason why these look finished in the greater context is because there are hints and suggestions of greater detail elsewhere. So these are mainly just silhouette, with some indications of more silhouettes, layering of trees. These are buildings, just with the general shape of the windows and silhouettes of extra addition. But elsewhere, he has these really detailed scenes that help describe what we're looking at. So those parts that he just took here in the red are up here in this corner. It's a huge scene. Yeah, they don't need to be that big in detail. All you need to know is the general information. But you're closer up here, so you have a good idea of what it looks like. He shows you how you can approach this systematically. Always start with a silhouette. That way you can build on the amount of detail and stop at a certain point when it's no longer necessary. So you can kind of think of that from a line work point of view, where if you were doing a big scene, you get a bunch of building silhouettes, and maybe just adding the windows is enough. That would be grouping for areas of rest and areas of detail. The place where you want the detail is going to be up close, where the stuff probably matters more to the viewer. And so by controlling this, you can control where the person is looking, here in the foreground, and then not overworking all of that detail in the background by only just loosely indicating. He doesn't even indicate all of the houses. He just shows that this is a big rectangular mass. All of that is going to be buildings, and here's some ideas of what that looks like. And each layer in front of it is slightly more detailed than the last.
So even if you had like the dexterity and speed to render detail in everything, it still wouldn't be like desirable.
Correct.
Everything has detail.
Yeah, it still wouldn't be desirable because you are foregoing a visual design principle, which is areas of detail and areas of rest. By introducing that variety, you allow for your eye to dance around the image, look at different things, and prevent getting overwhelmed. So I will link this here. Controlling line detail. Jordan Tuffin. Spelled his name wrong. Okay. I'm going to go back to critiquing Bird's stuff. Yeah, you forgot we were doing that, huh? Okay, so general ways that I would push this would be, break up the size, make that big, bring this one in a little bit, make that one bigger, make this one smaller, make this one bigger, make this one smaller, make this one a lot smaller, and then maybe small. We would have a main tree trunk. We would expand this out and then break that up however you can. Also be mindful of negative space. So all the space in between branches can still be seen as all medium sizes. You might push that around so that this branch is closer to this one. And so now there's a larger gap in between.
There's so many rules to be mindful of.
Yeah, it's a lot, and you build up this skill over time. It's definitely a lot to think about. The biggest one that I want to touch on is this cactus, before moving on. And totally, I'm not even sure how I would revise it. But this guy. Right now, all I'm getting is this big circle group, and then there's a bunch of visual noise. This is all kind of just noise right now because it's not designed. It's not directed. Yeah. So if we were to try and push this, maybe we would have one major shape like this. These would kind of be supporting... Man, I don't even know. We could try to go for a big shape in the middle with some mediums here, and then like that. That way when we edit this...
Wouldn't that be like too symmetric?
We can go for symmetrical if that's what we want. Okay. So symmetry is not bad as long as it looks like it's on purpose. So you want to design good symmetry. And I know it's difficult. It's like, man, how do you even design good symmetry when you're talking about big, medium, and small? Well, I'll try to do that here. We'll try. I still struggle with this stuff myself, so no promises. I'm just trying to apply a general design principle. So we've got this one. Shrink this down. Whoops. And this is, it's looking more grouped, I think. I'm probably going to add some negative space so that we can get a break from our main guy. These need to be expanded. They don't need to, but I'm doing that because I want to expand their size, then have this one be back here and have it be small.
So the red lines that you just made there are kind of like just guidelines.
Just guidelines. I'm editing what he has. The red lines that I put in would have basically totally changed his idea. So what I'm trying now is just using them as guidelines of where to fit stuff, and then working with what he has.
What do you think of his line work on that cactus?
I'd say it's fine. I like, from what I can see of the rest of the images, because I totally butchered that by editing it so much. I like that he is showing, he's focusing on his silhouettes, which we covered a lot in the last session. And then he's breaking up the silhouette with occasional detail, which these are all good moves. Those are good things to do.
Yeah.
All of the wrapping wireframes is maybe not necessary. I would just kind of get rid of some of them, because we don't need to see all of it. We just need some information.
So the preferred ratio for contour lines would be like maximum 5 by shape, by form, or like give or take.
If you're talking about like internal lines, the lines that you use to describe stuff, I would say a good general idea is people talk about the 70-30 rule, and that would be if you have a shape, 30% of it is going to have detail, The other 30% will stay loose. So, for instance, you have this shape here, and I'm just covering it up. Maybe 30% of this can be the wrapping contour, and I'm even designing where I put the contour so that it's controlled in this part of the shape, whereas this is all open. Again, this one has all uniform shape. They're all the same size, so that would be edited. But yeah, we can move on from that.
Got a question about the process design, the thought of design. You were like editing the cactus.
Yeah.
You're like using the big medium small on the proportional weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there another element you use when you're like redesigning this like these sketches? I mean, you have like a reference, but the reference it may be like too boring. Is there another element you use to redesign that reference?
Okay, so you're saying if I have a reference of a cactus in front of me, do I have a strategy for redesigning that just by looking at it?
Yeah, like using like the big medium small technique, or the proportional weight you just mentioned.
Sure. Let's try one. It's going to be a lot of interpretation, and I definitely don't blame it on Bird, because I don't think I communicated it much either. I think I said look at reference and draw it well. So that me talking about this is looking in and just saying how would I make it look more appealing, not that what he necessarily did was wrong for the assignment. But if we were to take a reference and we were to draw it, if we wanted to draw this accurately, I would do this. I would give the shape of the bowl. And we've got shapes here. They're about equal with each other. There's one further up. What I'm doing with these gesture lines is creating groups. And so I'm grouping in shapes based off of what I see. So now you've got the general idea of this cactus, and you might add some information that tells us what this is. So we've got small bumps that let us know this is a pointy cactus. You've got some smaller, we'll use thinner line weight, and we'll go over this as if we want to have, we want to use the natural contour of the cactus to help us describe that it is round and bulbous. So we'll use this, and I'll only just have some detail. Then this one is pointy, and I don't want to go over and do points on this entire thing. So instead, I will have specific areas that I make fuzzy, and then I'll think of like a 30% gap, and then think about a 70% gap, or a 70% area of fuzz and detail. I'll fill that in just a little bit. So now you know that this is fuzzy, but not the whole thing is done that way. you can go in and you can think about how these contours are here, and then I would detail out some of them, but not all of them, and think about grouping. Solidify the silhouette, and now you've got a cactus there.
When like grouping the 30, like to recap, the 70-30 principle is 30% gets detail and 70% doesn't, or
It can be whatever you want. You could do 70% total detail and 30% rest. If you have, like, maybe this is a machine and you have this big area, maybe it's an open thing and it's tons of pipes, right? So you've got all these pipes and trinkets and pistons, and they're all doing stuff, and it's a bunch of visual noise. That's totally fine. Then you're going to keep the rest of the machine detail free. It's going to have a control panel, and that is technically what we're talking about.
yeah. In organic subjects, how would you like compose that 70-30% principle? Like, would you put all the detail right in front always? Is it more natural that way, or?
Peter Hahn talks about that, and I think Drawbox as well. You can visit the page on texturing. Drawbox talks about it where he puts detail in areas of shadow, because you can use detail to also convey light and stuff. So if you have something crossing into shadow, then you can show how that texture changes and gets more dense as it turns to black. That's one way that you can do it. Or you can have a focal point, like if you have a fish, and let's just say this is a fish. He's got an eye and he's got gills, right? That looks like a fish, kind of. So you might detail all his scales, and he's got eye detail, he's got some cresting here, he's got the lips, I don't know, and the gills. And I might do the underside, since there would be shadow there, and we want to communicate that what's it called? Traversal. As it shifts from light to shadow, we'll introduce some detail and have it transition. That's what I'm looking for. That's the word. To dark. So you can control your areas of detail like that. Then the rest of the fish doesn't need all that scale work. It doesn't need all the scales. It doesn't need the crazy lines. You might just have the general pattern of what it looks like.
But like, I'm sorry if I'm hammering on lateral subject.
Sorry, I lost you. Go ahead. Try again. You went out for a bit.
Wait. Yeah, so when you draw more detail in order to communicate a shadow and transition between light and shadow, that works when you're drawing, right? But and I'm sorry if this is too complex, but when you like go into values and painting and all that, does that hold any value still, or?
Yes, you want to keep those principles in mind. So maybe if you're working from a value point of view, you would still think about where your detail is going to be. You would just think about it in terms of exposure, which is how a camera would work. And when you look at exposure, like for instance, in this cactus picture, this is exposed for the dark. If you pointed your iPhone or your camera at this cactus, it's in a really brightly lit environment, and you focus on the cactus so that it has a dynamic range instead of being blown out in light, it's going to lift the dark levels so that you can see more detail in them. But because it lifted those dark levels, it's also lifting all of the bright levels. So you can see in all of the light behind it, it's blown out so that there's almost no detail in the light. It's all just white. Whereas the dark area has more subtle shifts between its spikes and the gradient of light to shadow. All of the detail is there. So you would pick, do I want my detail in the shadow side? Is that what I'm exposed for? And then all the light gets blown out and compressed to be that area of value? Or do I want all of my detail to be in the light side, and then everything gets compressed on the shadows?
So it's value compression once again.
Yes. And of course we will talk about that much more as we get to values in weeks from now. But I'll keep going on how I would design this cactus to answer Matthias's question, because I started with the realistic, and my general approach to drawing that was massing in groups with these gesture lines, and then controlling my indication of detail. If I wanted to design this, then maybe I'm going to try designing a smaller pot. I don't know. I'm just, if you were to think of this from an animation designer's mindset, animation is often wonky on purpose. Animation is a joke. That's how I've heard Will Weston describe it, and he's worked in animation for ages, so he definitely gets it. If you have a small pot, but then you add comically large cacti, then you're already getting a statement piece. In fact, this is just a matter of how far you want to push it, but we can go from here and we can copy this out again. And then I'll just shrink all this. And you can push this pot into teacup territory, right? You can make this pot this big. And then you can make the cactus coming out of it just overflow. If you want to, you can have this tilt some. Let's warp it a bit. Now we have this asymmetrical cactus shape, a medium shape, and a small one. And then just make sure that I'm accounting for everything that I put in. I'm grouping the big, medium, and small. So you could design a cactus like this and still be using the same reference that you started with over here. You might just be using it to inform your details. So like I've got this, I've got that contour line. I know that it has some spikes, so I might still spike it the same way. I might still add detail the same way that I did. But now it's been designed and grouped in a way that we created, right? So it's how far you push it. It determines how stylistic and how much of a statement that you're trying to make. If you don't want to go that far and you just want to focus on, okay, I really want a specific cactus blade to be my focal point, and this is going to be big. I'm going to have a medium one here, and then you want to avoid symmetry. So even if you had two smaller ones, you want to avoid them making a similarly sized larger shape. So I'm going to make that non-uniform, so that's small. And then you could even design some small stuff that pops out. And you could do that and come up with something new. Or you can just go off of this information. Now, there doesn't have to be 3 cactus blades here. If you still want to use the general idea, use these as your overall shapes. So now within that, you have more cactus blades. You got a thin one, a medium one, or a big one, a medium one. The whole idea is that you start with that group because you're designing from the abstract point of view first. Then we'll have another one here, which allows us to do this. So that pot, or this cactus, this potted cactus, has been designed in a way that is still taking elements from the original reference, but you're designing with visual appeal principles.
Yeah, thanks.
And you know, this is really helpful for me too, because I almost never draw with this in mind, but it's very helpful just to think this through. Okay, so we are still going through Bird's critiques. This is the ultra simplification assignment, which what I did, and this would be more like this would be more of looking at a reference and designing it. So if the first sheet that he's shown, I imagine he was looking at a reference and drawing it. That's totally fine. He's doing a good job. He's capturing the shapes. He's getting his practice in. All of the visual appeal stuff will come with practice and the information given to you.
A last note of that on that last drawing, and if it's quick, I don't know. Planes in organic shapes. Do you ever think of planes when drawing like trees or anything other than rocks, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. That's you can see Bird thinking about it too. When you're drawing trees, you might, it's going to be mostly a cylinder. So if you have a cylinder, then this is a general cylinder shape. You can communicate it more by adding contour lines. If you have a graphic shape of a tree, and this is the tree trunk and the tree's up here, then you can communicate roots by adding those contour lines. And so then you'll know how it's oriented in space.
So planes in trees would be cylinders.
Yes.
Mostly.
And you know, you can always play with it. Not saying that you have any reason to, but for instance, the squirrel holes, I don't know what those are actually called, but he's got this tree branch here and he's got this squirrel hole. Well, that is a 3D form. That is a donut. So you've got this. It's a ring. Inside of that ring, there's some thickness to it. And that goes inside and it wraps in this way. So you are still thinking a 3D form as you're drawing this. If you wanted to shear off the side of a cylinder, then as you have a surface like this, you might cut off part of it and flatten that out. So now this is a flat edge and this is a round edge. You could stylize that and say, what if I use that idea for a stylized image and every tree has a really hard edge, then a soft edge that wraps back around. Who knows? I don't know. But you can absolutely be thinking of form at any point in time, because it's the most important aspect of art is being able to communicate form. And so yeah, he's got an underside, and that is there. Then these are all indications of form. If I wanted to, I could come in here and I could define this geometry down to the wireframe. And So yeah, very important. Even in organics, it can be difficult to know how to assess it at first because it's not concrete like a box. But in general, they're just randomized boxes is a good way to look at it. And we'll cover that right here with his rocks. So what I demoed last week was how you can start with a graphic rock shape. And through this, the more like edge detail that you have, the more it implies geometry. So I'm going to break it up like this. And now everything that is in here can connect to another point, and you're going to have planes that way. So just by drawing this in, we have a visual description of what the rock looks like. And each of those is a plane. You can decide for yourself, is this an upward facing plane or is it a side facing plane? And so the side might be not facing direct light, so you would shade it a little bit. So we'll just add some hatching.
How do you not go overboard? Because I find myself going overboard with planes, like immediately.
Yep, and so that, again,
70-30, yeah.
These are visual appeal principles. If you find yourself not knowing when to stop, then always refer back to these rules. So notice that this area of shadow, for one, so we have two different things at play here. All of the planes that I put in are focused on 30% of the overall silhouette of that shape. So I've got this big shape, only 30% of it has planes. This shape, only 30% of it has planes. But at the same time, by throwing those planes into shadow, there are also areas of rest. And now this is 70% of the larger picture, and it's an area of rest. While the planes, which were 30%, are now busy areas in the light. So you have this dichotomy. You're playing with both. So you get an appealing rock set up this way. And, that's something that you will build up over time. If you want to try it again, then we will set up this shape. I don't know. Can be anything. This looks more like a crystal to me. But let's say it's got a top plane. I'm only going to detail out just enough for us to have an idea of how it's set up. And to make its design more natural. Now, I don't necessarily have it just pushed away into a 30% corner, but I stopped before it got too busy. If I really wanted to detail out some more, maybe I would pick an area that has already been detailed or an area that we want to look at, and I would add more ideas. Right, so now when you go in and you were to light this, all of this is going to be on the shadow side, so and that will cast a shadow. Now you have 30% in light and 70% in shadow, which would be in rest. You can have a lot of visual noise in here. That's totally fine. That's a visual style. You could do a lot of detail if you wanted to. But again, so then you would know as a painter that you're going to hide all of that detail in the shadow and allow for your areas of light to be the rest spot, so it's all about balance and visual design, which you can take those lessons and apply them to concept art, or you can apply it to general landscape sketching, which we're doing now. So if I were to mess with Bird's drawings, he went for ultra simplification, which is what the assignment was. I want to simplify whatever he saw as much as possible. And I'm going to shrink this down. The idea is to take an organic shape that you see in nature and apply
big, medium, small.
From the ultra simplification perspective, what I was talking about last week was communicating the essence of a shape. So this is like animation thinking. If you see a standard tree, and a tree is normally shaped with a bunch of branches and stuff and all sorts of things, you would approach that like the way he did, which is one big circle. So I'm going to change up the size that he did for these rocks. So again, we got big, medium, small, because that is a great principle to hammer home before we really dig into designing entire scenes. But we've got a big, medium, and small, but this doesn't look very squarish to me, does it? So if we were to edit this, we might take this big shape and I'm going to straighten it out a little bit more. Then this one, I'm going to have like just a cube there. Then this can be a rectangle. This one again, I want this to be as blocky as possible to simplify what could have been there from the start. So I know that's a hard principle to wrap your head around, but if I were to try to turn it as square as I could, I would make sure to introduce some genuine squares and make the silhouette read more squarish as well, which means more parallel lines, more rigidity, and less creating curves. We would want to simplify that curve so that it's more either blocked off or more trapezoidist. Notes of big, medium, small are going to apply everywhere as well, so we can expand this shape, make this one medium still, and shrink that down. This can be shrunk, this can be expanded. Ultra simplification for triangles is difficult, but people have a lot of success with it as well, because triangles are polygons and they kind of just naturally mesh with other polygons. You can make one and then you can make another one, and you have all these varying shapes that you can connect, so you start getting very easy variations in big, medium, small design. If we were to look at this, I think these two similarly sized edges here could be avoided. I would maybe shrink that down, and I think that this idea can work, but if we did, we would probably need to shrink this down so that it doesn't feel like it is the same idea as down here. And so by doing this, I'm also grouping this together more. And so I will demonstrate what that means.
Could grouping be like I add a lot more triangles on one side?
What I mean by grouping is that original abstract idea. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing a triangle with an extra triangle popping out and an extra triangle here. But what do they all have in common? They're following this leading line of the original group, the original grouped shape. So there are lots of ways you can group things together. So yeah, I definitely see how that can be confusing. I do mean the original abstract shape design. We've got this big triangle. This triangle is a small part that sticks out of it, and this triangle is a small part, is a medium part that sticks out of it as well. So the reason I think that that's slightly improved is, one, we have a big, small, and medium. It just kind of feels more interesting. But two, we have them following the original statement. Whereas before this was out here, so it kind of broke that statement because it became a second one. It became a second statement. Which is why that original abstract design is so important. And the same goes for here. So this looks like maybe he was looking at a range of hills. How would we design a range of hills to improve on that? We might have like a more defined peak that goes over this way. So we would shrink down this mountainside so that it fits within that group, and then this one is going to be expanded so that it feels like it is more dominant. And then I'll just fill in all that empty space. So take away, and now we have this mountain with what appears to be some naturally receding perspective. And I might move this either over here to be with that as well. So now you get this sort of layering effect. So oops. By introducing some shapes that are in front of this shape, you get a sense of it coming forward in perspective, and then also keeps the other side clear.
Is there a big medium?
Yeah, so I did try to implement medium here, small here, and this was big. With this, you can, maybe you would.
So the ratios of big, medium, small can vary too.
All of the time, yeah. It's
50, 20, 10, 50, something like 50, 40, 10, for example.
Exactly. Absolutely. You can do 90-10. You can split it up 3 ways, 60, 30, 10, anything that you want, and you can place it anywhere so long as you have that in mind, so that this is a bigger shape and this is a medium shape. This is a medium shape, this is a small shape, but they're both smaller than the big one. By keeping that in mind, you'll generally end up with a visually appealing end result. Now, if it's interesting, you have to play with that. But at least it's going to have that variation that we like to look for that kind of makes things feel good. And it's a nebulous concept, and other than percentages, I don't have a great way to define it. But that's how I've had it explained to me before. So here we are looking at some perspective breakdowns. I think Bird picked some relatively simple ones, which is fine because we were mostly talking about sketching organics. So all that I asked people to look for was to look at an organic shot and then define where the horizon line is. And I think he did that. So this one, the way to tell if you're at the correct horizon line is, can you see the top or the bottom? I would say of this stump, you can't see the top of it. And that would mean that our box is above the horizon line. So for this instance, I think this horizon line should be brought down low here, and instead the horizon line would be this. It can be a little confusing because you're still seeing the top side here. And that would be because this is a rolling hill. If you have a low horizon line, and you generally wouldn't see a box above that horizon line, well, if you have a rolling hill, there's going to be some distance that you're still seeing the top plane wrap around until you can no longer see the top. So that's misleading, which is why I looked for this tree stump instead to find a definite answer. But otherwise, he found this leading line, and that probably goes down to there. So I would say, good job. Then here, difficult, and I don't know if it's really the best approximation again, because we have all of this, and even at the most, this might continue on to around here at the most for this horizon line. The reason I say that is I think Bird was informing his convergence off of natural objects. These cliff faces aren't like boxes. They aren't defined shapes that are following, that they're all parallel lines following a vanishing point. These could be curved shapes. So maybe the perspective is really flat, but because they curve, they look like they're following a perspective line. And you can also see just how graphic this overlap is. That vanishing point, that perspective line has to be really shallow in order to see convergence like that with such graphic overlap, which would imply that the edge of the water that you see here is probably the horizon line.
Yeah. So not always, like when you look at this scene that has water, it's not always the edge of the water that is the horizon line. Right?
Correct, because it was stopped by this cliff. Beyond that, the horizon is still going. The ocean doesn't just stop, so that is a common problem that people have, where they will have a horizon line and they'll design out this shape, and that can look like an ocean. That's fine, but it's going to make more sense for you to have extra landmass that overlaps and has extra detail, and maybe there's still more that's beyond here, and maybe the horizon is actually slightly higher, and maybe it keeps going that direction, and you could change that. So it's not a perfect rule that the horizon just ends at the waterline. Yes.
Alex.
Alex,
Can you explain a little bit more about that you said about graphic overlaps in those words that in the
yes,
like the cliff in the water?
What I was describing was because of this low horizon line, which I talked about earlier in the lesson. This is a really common cinematic angle, and even demonstrated by Bird picking two, seemingly at random, and they both use this low horizon line. They're both used to communicate people with a graphic read. It's used to establish, and it's used to provide graphic read because you're not showing the overall space of an area, you're showing a person and getting a quick idea of what else is there. And by doing that, you have a low horizon line. Because of this low horizon line, you have convergence that happens very rapidly. From what we know of perspective grids, they get more compressed as they go on towards the horizon. And as a result, you're going to get graphic shapes because of this. What I'm seeing in this cliff face here is the idea of land. Now this land might wrap around like this. But if you imagine that this is passing through and then coming out and coming to another spot, and then, so that's like a little inlet, maybe a shore where a boat could stop itself, what you're mainly going to see is that graphic overlap.
Oh, I didn't know. Now I got it. Thanks a lot.
And then that repeats itself, and it's kind of following the perspective. So behind it, you just have to think about the form of what's going on with that mountain. But what you end up seeing is a bunch of cliffs that, or not cliffs, but rocks that overlap each other. Because you're seeing the front, and it's wrapping around, you're seeing the next front. And that helps us see that the perspective is staying really close to this area. All of that perspective is really tight, and it can't possibly go up here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he nailed this one. This one's absolutely 1 point perspective. There is a certain spot that they want us to look, and it's right here. And everything else is just used to gate us off with detail so that this area of rest, light, allows the eye to immediately focus. Okay. So then I asked for people to draw 5 man-made structures from reference. Looks like he picked some concept art as well. That's totally fine. Because I'm not sure if I've seen anything in real life that looks like this. It looks like Oblivion, the Elder Scrolls. That's what it reminds me of. I think this is good. I have no issues. These are all good. Like, they're mechanically sound. It looks like he didn't use any grid help, so the only things that we would want to look for is just like, do these appear to follow a similar convergence and it's not broken? And I would say that that is absolutely true. It looks good to me. There's just small stuff that betrays the idea, but overall, it's solid. With this one here, just clean up that edge. Otherwise, good job, man. Okay, so this last one, the assignment... Oh, I think I missed one. Let's go back in. Discord. Yeah. Okay, so the next part of the assignment was taking one of the man-made structures that you used and studying it, understanding its form language, and then reapplying it to something new. So, what do we see from this original reference? We see oh, I've got people on YouTube saying it looks like a World of Warcraft thing. Yeah, that's probably it. We got spikes. And that's repeated everywhere. We have this like cylindrical rectangle format. And then the last thing I would say is that this idea is like, it's a rectangle from the front, but really the profile of it looking down is like a hexagon. So you have this hexagonal layout for your towers. And let's see how that's reapplied to his new structure. I think he's also drawing from these triangles. On YouTube, you're asking, how do I join the classes? Kushik, you can join my Discord channel, which may be in the description of this video, or at least in the description of my edited YouTube videos. When you join the Discord, I can assign you a role for the class, and I will ping everyone who's in that role. Right now, I'm doing every Wednesday for sure, but I plan to do stuff more frequently. So I would say that like it definitely has the same mood, right? It's got pointy, menacing. If I wanted to make this feel like it was still from the same property, I would have probably added, for one, the flags. The flags help really add to the identity because it's a form of branding. But two, instead of this being, well, you know what? He's got that here as well. This is a double-sided curved metal, so he definitely did that here. I think maybe there was some misunderstanding of the form of the tower itself, which can be more of a hexagon and stretch behind it. And that's what I would do here as well. Just keep in mind this is totally rough, but I would add some more like hexagonal towers to mirror what's going on there. If I were to try drawing from this, I would approach, maybe I want, let's go with a single tower setup, big tower. We'll design it from the front, big hexagon tower, triangle. Then we're going to support it with, maybe this is instead of it being a gate, this is going to be the building. So we want small, and this is going to curve up some like it has in the reference. And I want like those to be there. And then small ones here. And let's go for like big scary stuff. Then for the rest of the building, I'm going to jut it off, and then this would be a hex or like a pentagon. So in perspective, if I'm drawing through it, it would be that, but in reality, we're only going to see these two edges here. And now you can draw those little cylindrical rectangles.
So do you have any tips for drawing hexagonal and polygonal shapes in perspective?
Yep, I do. I have done enough exact perspective practice to know what I'm doing. But if you need to work it out, you can always plot out. So we've got a square. You then copy this, or we draw a hexagon inside of it. And these connection points are what are most important. So all I'm imagining is when I'm in perspective and I've got a square here, I know that I need to look for connection points that are back here and in front, then in the middle. Once that I know that they're there, I can connect those points, and I have a hexagon in perspective. When you extrude upwards, you won't see that edge. I got something wrong here. Ah. Whoa. Excuse my mistakes.
So is this 1 point perspective right now? Or
Yes, that would be 1 point. You can also have something like
But since since like it's to the left, we can see the right range.
yeah, you can see this side because it's tilted some. But it's still 1 point perspective because I don't have convergence going this way. And let's say you want to save yourself the effort. I don't recommend this for people who are still in need of learning, but you can always take an image and project it using transform tools. So now that's there.
Once trying to draw bay windows and I just gave up because I did not know. Okay, that.
So that's a hexagon.
Uh-huh.
But again, I'll show you can start with something thin like this. I know that there needs to be 2 points back here, which means following them, they're going to be there. And I'll extrude this one down. And then I know that convergence means that these will follow up here.
And now you do have convergence.
Yes.
This was
So that shape from a silhouette looks like this.
nice.
Okay. So it's all about understanding the profile of a shape at its root, communicating that shape in perspective. It can be anything. And then you can bring that up and mirror it on top as well. And then you get that shape. Okay? So yeah, I would focus on big, and then I would try to use all of the same elements here in ways that allow for you to kind of get the same idea that it still belongs in universe. And then small little spikes. Although, I mean, all in all, still very accurate. So, good job, bird. This last one, I don't know if I am going to critique because we're coming up on 3 hours now, so it's about what I'd consider a stopping point. I would say from a general look, I'm not sure what the shape of this body of mass is here. This looks like we're looking at water, I think, and maybe this is a cave entrance. The reason that this looks difficult to parse is because I'm not sure what is going on after this point. I'm not sure if there's something behind it, or if this is thick, if this is coming forward, and that's why there's that layering effect, or if it's wobbly. Right? So a way to kind of clean that up would be maybe I have the horizon lines up here, and we've got this cliff face. I would show a little bit of overlap so that we have an understanding that that is going backwards. The same, and now this is further up and closer to the horizon line, so it's very clearly something else in 3D space. And now this might be more like a rock that we're focusing on. I'm not entirely sure, but that's what I'm going with. So by showing that overlap, it looks like it's even kind of messing around in it, and then it's got more stuff behind it. And instead of this ending right here, maybe there's an extra little thing behind this. And we want to keep big, medium, and small in play, so I'm just making these smaller overlaps. Maybe we've got just some cloud. And now what else is here? We've got I believe these are bushes. And this is a rock. And this is a shoreline. Okay, so the reason that this is difficult to look at, not that sounds really harsh. The reason this is difficult to read, understand is I think a lot of these come off as loose shapes that don't have much placement in perspective. So what's going to help is what are called T-lines. And T-lines are when you've got something like this over here and this overlaps. So now you get this T shape. By doing this, you create a hard overlap. It looks like this land is now overlapping with this land, so there could be some stuff that goes down here. That is now a side edge. We've got this rock, making this look a little more defined, and also thinking about its place in perspective. See how, if we think of it as a box, we might interpret that this is coming out from outside of the water's edge. That's okay since it's a rock. It absolutely could be in the water's edge. But instead, I'm just going to move it down a tad. So it feels like it's firmly in the land. Then this one, I'm going to thin that out, make this a more defined shape. So now we have that rock there.
I think the brains was missing.
What was that again? Sorry?
I think it was that rock you just drew what was missing some planes to give you more perspective.
Yeah, he's got some indicated here. But you're right, like it's not quite enough to really get what it's doing. And then lastly, we've got this bush shape. So from a graphic point of view, nothing wrong with this. You can overlap that rock, and there you go. I think what will make it feel more on purpose is to have it overlap a little bit more.
To get closer to that, the 9 square grid. What is it called?
The 9 square grid?
Yeah, the third. get it closer
Oh,
to
the rule of thirds, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, so if we keep in mind the rule of thirds here as well, that also puts it in some thirds. And now if we want to communicate that that is a bush, he's got some information, and I think that's the right idea, but we can be a little bit more careful with how we communicate it. So maybe we've got some leaves sticking out on the corner, then we overlap with some leaves so we get an idea there. That overlaps while also giving us a good excuse for a T-line, so now you have an idea of its form. And then anything else that we show will just be like the transition of edges and shadows. Alright, so now let's darken that down so it's not red anymore. So yeah, I think this might help clean up where it is form-wise, make the space read a little more.
Would you say composition-wise is it good?
It's difficult to say. I don't like more square formats, but it looks like he was drawing it on an iPad and just worked with the iPad's aspect ratio, so no problem there. You can still think about rule of thirds. Compositionally, if you wanted to lead your eye to this rock, then there are some things that you would edit or adjust. So for one thing, this rock, maybe you do move it back up a little bit, and then this rock is smaller, still overlapped. So we'll add some extra information there just to be clear that there's more to that than we see. So now what I'm getting is this curving line. You might think about it arcing like this, and so I might want to add some rocks that are jutting out of the water like that. That also kind of come out of this rock space. That way we can have an idea of like this leading line that recedes back. I would change this cloud sum. So if we were thinking about painting this, what I would want is to have maximum contrast. So I would put like a cloud right there. It's really cheesy, but it works for a reason. So we'll just have some clouds like that, and then let's mask this in real quick. So set this to multiply. that would be kind of how I approach it. Some things to note while I'm doing this is A, I didn't follow the typical rule of darkest in the foreground results in lightest in the background. This is, I went for, I want a light shape in the front here because I don't want it to be in shadow. We're in the daylight, and that's totally acceptable. So by thinking about this graphically and saying from the most basic point of view, I want light, and dark, I can mass it in that way, and it's going to make sense compositionally. Then on a micro level, within that light shape, within this light shape, I darken some of it so that it reserves me the ability to pop this area with complete white so that you get the hardest contrast of light and dark right here. And then you can kind of imagine that this is in shadow, this is still in light, and it makes sense. Like you can end up justifying it. So that results in us having this idea cleaned up.
Right.
And I think that's gonna do it for us today, you guys. Let me find the homework tab again. It's somewhere. Okay. So again, homework is going to be perspective breakdowns. That's looking at images and that is looking at images, understanding what their perspective is. It's going to be easiest on 1, 2, and 3 point. Bird picked, the assignment was to pick natural perspectives, so he did pick those, and they were difficult. What you want to look for is if you can see the top, or if you can't see the top, or if you can see the bottom. As long as you can see the bottom of something in perspective in a landscape, that means the horizon line is higher. If you can't see the top of it, then you are below that point. So if you see rolling hills, that doesn't mean that the horizon line is up here. You want to look for stuff like a tree trunk where you can't see the top, but you can see it down here. Then, so we'll do 12 total of those, and then 30 compositions. Feel free to look at other artists and get inspiration for your setups. But I want people to draw a bunch of compositions, experiment with big, medium, and small, put a bunch of small boxes, put a bunch of big boxes, just draw. Try some cylinders if you want. Just draw and see what happens when you put primitives in space. Even if you don't have an idea, even if you go in and you sketch something out, chances are you're going to have your visualization sparked. You're going to draw a bunch of boxes and you're going to think, well, I guess that could be that could be that, and that could be that. And then how does all that fit together? If you're following a perspective grid, it's going to make a lot more sense, and not me just drawing randomly.
So it's kind of experiment.
Yeah, it's experimenting. It's playing with the mechanics of perspective to compose primitives. Because for the next week, we're going to take the best ones that you came up with and apply a theme to them. Turn those compositions into something real. So, feel free to experiment. I do like to have a 16:9 aspect ratio at least. Which is widescreen format. 2.39 to 1 is cinematic aspect ratio, which is like how movies are set up. And if you want to be bold and go for that, go for it. I really enjoy that aspect ratio. In general, avoid squares. If you want to go vertical, you can.
Great.
Okay. That's going to do it for us today, you guys. Any further questions that you want to talk about before we call it? No? Okay. Then thanks for joining me, everyone. I really appreciate it. That has been week 2 of the environment sketching course. Next week, we're going to be talking about using perspective compositionally and how to turn boxes into themed scenes. All right. Bye-bye.